discussion is how do you get private sector to come in with scale and urgency. And my last point would be that it needs the framing, the right framing, and I hope we can all in this panel explore what does it need to get the private sector to come in. I would say 3 components. One is the regulations, the policies, and the institutional reforms that can drive the changes that need to happen, whether it's in renewable energy or whether it's in agriculture and so on. So policy, regulatory and certainty is very important for investors because it's a high risk, long-term to calculate the returns. Second is certainty on the pricing and the calculation of these tariffs, whether it's the renewable energy or whether it's the electricity or whether it's whatever return you get on waste management or water and so on. The other one that we keep on hearing is also the foreign exchange risk. How to deal with the foreign exchange risk, because you are coming in with foreign borrowing, foreign money, but your income is in local currency. The last one, which I always hear all the time in all our discussions, is the pipeline of projects. Structuring those projects so that they are attractive for private sector and that banks or financiers or the World Bank or EIB would come in to finance this. So let me just close on that. And because now I'm kind of involved in this Blended Finance Alliance, this is really the homework that we have ahead of us, how to combine the different types of financing out there, catalytic finance from public money, from the budget, as well as philanthropy and private sector. And I would say the voluntary carbon market, you know, a lot of what funding can come if you can actually translate what your projects are in terms of the carbon credit that you can get, and that can be part of the financing as well. So let me end there.
Thank you, Ibu Marie. Next, I would like to turn to you, Vice President Chris Peters from the European Investment Bank. You're in the region for very specific reasons and also bring very good news. But European Investment Bank, or EIB, is one of the world's main financiers of climate actions. Last year, I looked up online, the share of EIB investment in climate projects or environmental sustainability projects is about 58% of your total financing. In your view, what are the role of the global financial institutions in sustainability? And if I may, why is this so important to the Indo-Pacific region, building on many great points that Ibu Marie already touched on?
Thank you, and first of all, thank you for the invitation. We are very pleased and honored to be here, and I can also congratulate you with this ASEAN Forum, very important one. And we have met a lot of people, and once again, it's for us as European Investment Bank a very important event. Now, saying this, the European Investment Bank, you know, is a European institution and a non-profit bank, and also we are the climate bank of the European Union. And I can be very brief because I agree with all the reactions that my colleague of the World Bank have said. But nevertheless, I shall try to be very brief and say something about what we as European Investment Bank can do. First of all, we are very specialized in green investments, and certainly when you look to infrastructure. And your question is, do we need green infrastructure? And I can be very blunt. When you invest in infrastructure and this infrastructure is not green, don't do it. Don't do it because it's not sustainable and it's not helping the governments, and it's not helping, and that's a very important point, all the citizens of the country. Don't do investments that are not sustainable. Now, saying this, it's of course very easy to say you must be green investments and you must go for that. Now, the European Commission launched a very, very important initiative called the Global Gateway. And the Global Gateway is specifically the answer on your question, what do we need when we invest in green infrastructure? Because the European Commission put 300 billion euros on the table to stimulate countries like Indonesia, but also the other countries of ASEAN, to invest in green investments. 300 billion euros. And we as European Investment Bank, Climate Bank, are the bank that make it possible that this very ambitious goal coming from the European Union is realized. Now, saying this, okay, what does that mean? That means, and it was already my colleague mentioned that, first of all, energy transition. You need an infrastructure, a grid, production of renewable energy and so on, and that means a lot of investments also in Indonesia, also in other countries of ASEAN. And we have very concrete discussed with PTSMI to stimulate this green, energy transition. Vietnam is already mentioned. I shall go Friday to Vietnam also to stimulate there the energy transition. This is the first element: invest in energy, renewable energy, green energy. Secondly, that is digital. Digital is, of course, also of very important, certainly in this region, to connect and to have the opportunity to be innovative. And of course, when you talk about digital and also climate, I think there are a lot of other things that we can do together. That means, for example, investing in water infrastructure. It's so important because we, as European Union, and European Investment Bank, wants to invest in projects that have an impact for the local society, for the people. And when you talk about water, when you talk about energy, when you talk about digital, you can put that message very clear. Now, last element in my answer is, what can the European Investment Bank do? First of all, we have a lot of experience in green investments. Inside of Europe, of course, but also outside of Europe. And the products are there common. We can provide you with a loan, but we are very innovative. We are also saying, and also to Indonesia and some other countries, we work with what we called a framework loan. That means that we agreed to have a loan of a billion or more money, and that the projects are coming step by step. Because the most important element is we are a project-driven bank. We need projects, and projects take time, certainly when they are green projects, to make that possible. Thus, we have a lot of instruments in the sector of loans. Secondly, and that was also here in Indonesia, I've understood, to launch green bonds. We were the first in the world to have launched green bonds, the European Investment Bank. And I've understood also that PTSMI have already also launched green bonds. Green bonds is a very important instrument to convince financial investors to put their money where they needed to put it, in green investments. And then, of course, we have also, because we are a non-profit bank and sui generis, we have more or less 1,000 engineers working in the bank. We are not a normal bank. We can say, when you have a project about grids in electricity and so on, we have the knowledge, not only bankable knowledge, but we can send experts in the water sector, in energy, in digital. And that makes us more or less unique, I must say, that we can also offer technical assistance. And to conclude, we are very active in the region. Why? Because we are convinced that economic growth, inclusive economic growth, needs infrastructure. Like I've said, when you need infrastructure, they must be green, sustainable, or doing nothing that is a waste of money. And that we can be a partner in a lot of projects, not only EIB, we're working always with other partners, World Bank, also other, and we work, and that's my last word, as a team Europe. Put all the energy together, all the energy of MDBs, putting the money together and make the ambition that Indonesia and also ASEAN has to make sustainable green investments. And that's the reason why I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. You mentioned a lot about collaboration with PTSMI. Now would just like to turn over to Pak Pradana Muti, Director of Risk Management at PTSMI, one of the leading development financial institutions here in Indonesia with strong mandate on sustainability. Can you talk to us about how does your mandate, PTSMI mandates, impact PTSMI's financing strategy in raising funds and also choosing types of projects?
Thank you very much, Paripan. Ladies and gentlemen, I think first of all, I would like to start with our newest mandates from government, which I can categorically split into two. One is the public mandate and the other is private mandate. The public mandate means that SMI is expected to be...
Sorry to interrupt, but you may need to speak up a little.
Okay.
Or if...
So the first mandate is the public mandate, which involves financing to public sector. SMI is expected to become the National Development Bank and serve all the 548 local governments in Indonesia to provide with innovative financing that's going to see or expect the outcome, the impact to social and economy of the region. So this is going to be our mindset, that everything is going to be based on what is going to be the social and economic benefit of our financing. So that's the first mandate. The second mandate is more towards the private financing, and this involves around our role as Energy Transition Mechanism Country Platform Manager. That's basically we are acting as the local domestic intermediary that is sit in between the assets and the financing. So whereby the sustainability in the energy transition program is a key theme that we try to apply in our activities. Yeah. So first, we are applying sustainability principles. So if you compare to World Bank or IFC standards, we are also pretty much adapting the 10 principles that is similar to what is being applied internationally. Diversity, land acquisitions, impact to community. So I think all is embedded to our principles in trying to provide financing to our counterparts. And it means that we want to serve our target market, which is the energy transitions that requires a lot of de-risking activities, technical assistance, as well as sometimes even grants. Yeah. So this is what we want to, our effort to trying to mobilize all those sorts of facilities, including collaboration with multilateral, bilaterals, even philanthropies. Yeah. We have done in the past in trying to fundraise or trying to mobilize all those facilities. First, I think I can remember back in 2018, we were the first corporations to issue a local corporate green bond. Although it's still a locally issued instrument, we are adhering to ASEAN bond standards. Yeah, so it's we're not just adhering to local standards and regulations, but also trying to adopt regional and international standards. And then after that, we are trying to create bilateral engagement and collaborations with ADB, World Bank, even AFD of France, and later EIB. So we want to collaborate with as many as possible to create those kind of facilities that is required by the assets. So this is going to be our new roles and our new mandates, trying to be on the side or affirmatively, we're trying to go extra miles, do extra efforts, yeah, to provide those facilities that is needed. And walk the talk as well, yeah, because in our operations, we also want to show that we are applying sustainability principles, yeah, like we are just recently being awarded Platinum Award of Green Building Society in Indonesia. So we just don't want to show, we just want to show that we are also applying the same principles internally as well. So I think that's my answer.
Thank you, Pak Pradana. Thank you, Pak Pradana. I think we heard three very important institutions talked about important finance. Now I wanted to switch gear to the private sector. We know that 70% of the capital needs to come from the private sector to go into the green investment. Marina Taib is a Petronas Vice President of Treasury. Petronas is not a national energy company, it's a global energy company, and is taking steps to play a role in energy transition in a massive way. Could you say why is sustainable and innovative financing is important to the region from the private sector perspective? Thank you.
Thank you, Paripan, and thank you for the question. I think a lot has been said as well about energy transition and in ASEAN especially, and how each of the countries in ASEAN and also a lot of corporations, including Petronas, have our own net zero targets to achieve, right, by 2050 or either slightly before or slightly after. And I think you mentioned just now that that requires a lot of investment. From an energy side, what we're seeing is that 3/4 of the energy being supplied or consumed in ASEAN is still fossil fuels. There's a lot of transitionary work that needs to happen there. And, we're all on this journey. It will take time and a lot of money. And, what we see is that it's not just about the sources of energy. It's not just oil and gas transitioning to renewable, solar, wind, hydrogen, carbon capture, decarbonization, but also the infrastructure and the grid that needs to be then enhanced. I think Vice President Chris talked about even the infrastructure needs to be green. If not, don't even do it. So I think these parts about, a lot of private capital has to go in, and a lot of companies that are undertaking them, including Petronas. Some of the green energy investments are also at utilities and infrastructure rates. So there's a lot of what we need is also perhaps access to capital at either differentiated rates or to make some projects bankable, because to get them over the hurdle. How do we get more projects out of the funnel to get financing? But I think maybe just to add on to what my colleague said, is also to get funding for research and development. Because a lot of the technology that's required for us to go into transition, say hydrogen or carbon capture, is still nascent, still very expensive, and it needs a lot of public-private partnership, a lot of grants to get that through the hurdle. So I think that's why for me, from an energy sector, sustainable financing is utmost important, because transition needs to be at everyone has a different starting point, right? We're all trying to get there, and everybody has different pace, different starting point, different levels of affordability as well. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Last person for this part one of this session, I'd like to turn to Jeremy Koklaw, the CEO and CIO of Rock Ventures, Australian-based private investment firms of Mike Cannon-Brookes that invest in companies focused on innovation solutions for decarbonizations. Now, from a very sort of straight private sector perspective, when you look at green investments, what do you look for, Jeremy?
Thank you for the question, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming to listen to our panel. I guess when you look at green investments, there's hygiene factors before you look at every single project. it has to be somewhere that's got environmental approval, it's got to have land title, whether that's from the landowner themselves, or in Australia where I'm from, you most often also need to get the approvals from the traditional owners of the land, the First Nations owners, to give you the right to use that land. So you have to do it in a fair and equitable way. That's sort of and then you've got to do engineering, and then you've got to feed and etc. You have to make sure that you do the hygiene stuff. But in the heart of every single project and all infrastructure is about the team and the people that are building it. It's the users, but it's also the people who are developing it, and you've got to back the right team. And that's sort of what we look for all the time when we think about investing in companies and in projects. And the second related thing beyond that is the commercial reality of whether a project is possible. Often nowadays, the technology risk of a renewable energy project is pretty low. So the solar, wind, even batteries around the world, we've seen gigawatts and gigawatts of that deployed. So we know the formula, we know they work, we know they're going to last for 30 years, 40 years, and they're going to have a certain sort of performance profile. But on the other side of that is making sure that you have commercial off-takers that are going to be stable, they're going to be hopefully creditworthy, that are going to stand the test of time so that you can get your project financed. And after you get through that hurdle, then it's what I've been learning in the last couple of days in Indonesia is the non-trivial task, and it's a very difficult task for every different country and every grid, is how do you actually connect into the grid? Drawing from my example in Australia, we have a pretty sophisticated grid. It's the biggest continuous grid in the world on the eastern seaboard of Australia. We have, most days, 55% renewables penetration into the grid during from 9 a.m. to about 4 p.m. in the afternoon because we have so much solar. But that situation is not the same everywhere else in the world. And if I look at the Indonesian example right now, since we've been here, the grid is probably at a point that we need to have an upgrade to be able to take in significant amounts of sort of green electrons, whether that comes from Eastern Indonesia or hopefully, one day, one of our portfolio companies, Sun Cable, can build a interconnector from Australia to supply some green electrons into Java or around the Indonesian islands. There's a real sense of the need to understand whether or not you can plug into the grid and have a connection agreement. So that element and understanding that in that geography is a really, really important point. And what we've kind of started to understand is that actually the grid operators themselves don't have a super good knowledge of if their grid can handle the variable load that various renewable energy can put in. So then it becomes really a software challenge, understanding, mapping out, building digital twins of your grid and understanding and running models around what can your grid take, and at some point taking some bravery that your grid's actually ready. In another example from Australia is we've worked out that in certain parts of the New South Wales grid, we can actually take 2 times as much renewables as we thought, because the poles and wires out there, when you model them properly, can have that flexibility. So it's actually trying to attack the problem in a different way, to use both software and hardware, so you can actually lower the cost of implementation and not just go hell and let them to go build for it, and be thoughtful as you go and execute their projects.
Thank you, Jeremy. Now, sort of in the last 15 minutes that we have left, we're pressed on time. Let me do this. Chris, I want to turn to you. In terms of what needs to change, if you were able to change one thing, only one, to unlock green investment into the Indo-Pacific region in ASEAN, what would be the most important change that you think that needs to happen?
Thank you, a very good question, but the answer is more complicated than giving one element. If I may, I give you 4 for 1, but very brief, of course. First of all, in general, we need transparency and political stability. That means that when you, in Indonesia, you work with a blue book and a green book, that's okay, but you need, when there is a decision, going green investment, that this, after 2 years, is not changed and stay in line. Secondly, you need standardization. You need, for us, example, from your EIB example is public procurement. It's very important to have a level playing field that private sector can play their role and so on. This is the second. Thirdly, the local governments and the local level is also very important to hire the capacity of the local level, was already mentioned, to also be involved when you speak about water and so on. And last but not least, certainly for ASEAN, the interconnectivity with the other members, certainly when you speak about grids, electricity and so on. Thus, I hope that these 4 elements can be realized more than ever before, and then you can convince not only us, but also the private sector to invest. Thank you.
Exactly. That sums well. Back to you, Marina. We talked about, you could help outline the bigger picture and the importance of sustainable finance in the ASEAN region. What is the single most important challenge that the company is going through? And if you were to change one thing in the policy space, what might that be?
Thanks, Barifan. Maybe I have not one thing, maybe 2 things. But okay, I think one of the challenges now when we talk about transitioning, and a lot is said about just and orderly transition, especially on the energy transition space, is that there are 2 kind of like energy systems moving at the same pace. The core hydrocarbons, the oil and gas that's being used for production to generate energy, but also the clean energy investment that will, move together at the same pace, at different pace, until perhaps clean energy overtakes fossil fuels. What needs to happen, I think, is that what perhaps needs to change is that while we talked about just now for sustainable and innovative financing for clean energy, what also needs to happen is that there's a lot of work being done on decarbonizing the core oil and gas, a lot of work to produce more emissions-abated oil and gas, to look at things like carbon capture and solutions and utilization. Funding for those areas is limited. It's getting more limited as we go on. So I think more policy and regulation needs to happen to enable green investments, but also how do you also incentivize people to produce cleaner and emissions-abated oil and gas? As we know, energy demand is still growing, for the next 20, 30 years. And we will still see fuels like gas as transition fuels still required in most areas. And that still needs financing. So I think policy in terms of incentivizing or encouraging discipline, good behavior, but also incentive and supporting the need to actually produce cleaner fuel needs to be there. So I think that's one of the 2 things that needs to happen. But I also you mentioned just now about stability, political stability. I think regulations also needs to have a clear outcome. Is it to have a target, say like for Malaysia, we have a national energy transition roadmap to produce, to have 70% of renewable energy capacity. So that's by a certain time. So how does financing policies and regulations also enable that? So, thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Back to you, Jeremy. In terms of what do you envision in terms of green investment in the region? Is it hopeful vision? Where do you see the future of this?
Yeah, I've been excited about the region for a while, and kind of coming to Jakarta for the last week or so. You see the abundance of life and so many young people here, and a rising income level for so many people, and you just know that not only is electrification going to happen everywhere in the world, and including in Indonesia and ASEAN, but also that the rising income of people are going to use more energy, and that's just a natural progression of how society becomes. And that is a really exciting thing, and some of the stats that you talked about, by 2050, this region is going to double its electricity use. So, but when we think about that, I think it's important to think about an abundance mindset as opposed to a minimal pie that we have to split, because the reality is more sun hits the earth every day than we can ever use as a whole society in our lifetime. So trying to figure out paths to harvest that sun and deliver it in where there's lots of people who use this electron and needs it most. Clearly, we can't clear out lots of land in Java to provide solar for sort of the 30 million people who live in Jakarta. That's not possible. But we have technology today, like HVDC, long-distance submarine cables, that can transport electrons from very, very far away. You know, Sun Cable is working on a project which is looking to transport 1.75 gigawatts from Darwin over 4,200 kilometers in subsea cable to provide Singapore with 15% of its energy needs, 100% green, 24/7 renewables from Australia. The technology seems crazy, but it's actually real, it's ready today, it's happening in Europe. We need people like Sun Cable to prove that it's a possibility in this region, and then we will build many, many more cables, like we see the fiber optic cables that are hundreds of them around in the world now. It was only sort of 25 years ago that the first submarine cable for fiber optics was laid, but now we don't even blink an eye when a new one comes in. So when you have the ability to have HVDC deployed in the region, then you can really think about how do you connect this region in a physical sense from electrons. You have great solar resource in sort of eastern Indonesia. Can you then pipe that across towards the west to Java to give it extra 2 hours of sun during the nighttime there? So it's 2 hours later and it's 6 p.m. in Jakarta, sorry, 4 p.m. Jakarta and it's 6 p.m. Over there, and that's how do you elongate the use of sun. And the more drastic example for us is, can we connect all the way from India into ASEAN, into Australia to New Zealand? Then you're getting sort of like 6 hours more sun on each side to really harvest the possibility of what solar can deliver. And I think as a region with so many countries, and you know, and we're currently sitting in a country with 1,700 islands, the connectivity of HVDC is a really compelling proposition that we see in the region.
Thank you so much for that. I just came from a Standard Chartered Bank sessions where I was one of the speakers. Clearly, there has been a lot of investment made already in the region in sustainable finance. The number that was presented was $82 billion. Including linked loans and things like that of that nature. So there must be some good stories that came out from this. The last 40 minutes or so, we've been talking about what needs to change, why is it so important, but what does it really mean in terms of people's lives? Ibu Marie, you've been working in the space for a long time. Is there one successful stories about green investment that you could share to help inspire all of us in this room? And hopefully there's a story from this region that could set examples for other regions as well. Over to you.
Yeah, let's end on an optimistic note, right? Because it is doable, and if done right, it will lead to growth and better lives and better incomes for the people. Let me give you 3 examples. One is in Vietnam, and it's related to what I mentioned earlier, the need for robust regulatory change or institutional change, or some commitment, as you were saying, the level of commitment from the government to make the change happen. So first, in Vietnam, they changed the feed-in tariff scheme that is generous to households and businesses to boost the Vietnamese solar PV. And it was introduced in 2017 with a development rate of 9 cents per kilowatt hour. And you have to reach commercial operation by the end of the 2 years, which is 2019. And what happened was there was an additional 4.45 gigawatt of capacity to the grid within 1 year. So it was even shorter than before. Another good example is what happened in the Philippines. Prior to this Supreme Court decision, the Manila Electric Company contracted electricity from its sister companies. And the Supreme Court deemed that, no, this is not good. You need to find the least cost approach through a competitive process. And so they had a green auction committee created, and 2 gigawatts of renewable was able to be put on stream, and out of which 1.26 gigawatt was solar at $67 per megawatt hour, compared to the price before the institutional change of $160 per megawatt hour. So, of course, benefit to the people. If I may, I have a really nice example, because we have all been talking about energy. I have a really nice example in agriculture, which is the low carbon rice in Vietnam. It started with a 500,000 hectare pilot supported by the World Bank. It is all about the Mekong River Delta. How do you produce more rice with less water, less seeds, because you have good seeds with cooperating with IRRI, less pesticide and less fertilizer? And the result was working with farmer communities and also not to do slash and burn clearing of land. The straw from after the harvest is made into compost for the next harvest, right? And this is what we call results-based financing. The result was people's incomes went up by 25%, and we were able to reduce carbon emission, methane equivalent of 1 million tons. And now it's being scaled up by the Vietnamese government to 5 million hectares. Indonesia is also going to adopt the same approach. And the results-based financing is very key, because Climate Investment Fund, for instance, is willing to come in and give funding. So I just wanted to share that example because, it's such a good example where you can actually achieve triple win, on the climate, on the development, as well as on involving the community.
That's great. Less input, more output. And more income for people. Any other participants would like to share other success stories that they made in the past? Chris.
Thank you. Two important messages still to give, and then I give you one example. First of all, there is no time to waste. We must act very quick to solve the problems. Air pollution here in Jakarta and other problems, we have no time to waste and no time to wait. Second very important message is left nobody behind. That means you need the support of the people. And now my example, and I hope that we can do that not only in Cambodia but also in a lot of other countries, that is, we invested in Cambodia to make it possible that there is drinkable water in Phnom Penh, the capital city of Cambodia, every day, every moment. And that is something that people can appreciate, that people can say, yes, it's true, we need green investments. We finance the infrastructure, water coming from the Mekong, going to the house, and so on and so on. And that is what we, as European Investment Bank, want to reach. Impact on people, impact in green investments, and I hope that we, and I have also other examples also in ASEAN, but that is one example that gives a very clear view what we are trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the speakers who joined the session today, and to the audience who have been listening and paying attention to many great insights. With that, I would like to end the session and we'll go back to the MC.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pariban Uwawitya, and all to our respectable speakers on our first panel and this afternoon with incentivizing green investment and the role of regulatory reform. Thank you once again to our moderator and our speakers for shining the light upon green investments, its impact to the people, stability, sustainability, and for its future. Thank you very much. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as we're now preparing for the third Leaders' Talk. That being said, please remain in your seat as we wait for the arrival of Prime Minister of Canada. We thank you for your kind attention. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, once again, we kindly invite you to please remain seated as we wait for the third Leaders' Talk on ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum. We are waiting for the arrival of Prime Minister of Canada. That being said, we kindly invite for all delegates and participants to please remain seated and to make sure, once again, for your smartphone and any telecommunication devices to be switched off to silent or vibrant mode. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the arrival of Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada. Your Excellency, we invite you to go straight to the podium as the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Please be seated. What a pleasure to see everyone here today. What a pleasure to see such a full room. I'm very grateful to be part of the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum today. This is an important year for Canada because we're officially launching the Canada-ASEAN Strategic Partnership. ASEAN is one of the world's fastest growing economic regions and Canada's fourth largest merchandise trading partner. Last year, Canadian exports and imports to and from ASEAN increased by 29% from the year prior. On est donc déterminés à resserrer et à renforcer nos liens avec l'Association des Nations de l'Asie du Sud-Est. Strengthening our ties with ASEAN is a big part of our Indo-Pacific strategy because we recognize and support ASEAN centrality in the region. We will be increasing our engagement in the long term with an even more active presence. We're already working together in sectors like aerospace, defense, clean technology, and education. And today, the focus of this discussion is green infrastructure and resilient supply chains. So as some of you may know, Canada is in the midst of our worst wildfire season ever. And this kind of terrible happening isn't limited to Canada. It's going on all around the world, including here in the Indo-Pacific, which is one of the regions most exposed to extreme weather events exacerbated by climate change. In 2023 alone, we've seen heavy rains and flooding here in Indonesia, but also in India, in the Republic of Korea, China, and Japan. Tropical storms have hit the Philippines and Taiwan. A cyclone devastated Myanmar. Heat waves have swept over Asia. In April, Laos and Thailand recorded their hottest temperatures ever. The disasters we're facing as a world are not just bad luck. They're being driven by climate change and nature loss. Climate change is a global challenge that requires global solutions. We must be responsible for each other. These past few years, whether it's been through natural disasters, a pandemic, a global economic crisis, or through the consequences of conflicts, we have seen time and time again just how interconnected everyone in the world is. And so it's increasingly clear that climate policy is economic policy, is security policy. Les communautés de partout doivent bénéficier d'investissements qui vont garantir leur avenir économique et environnemental. Communities everywhere, including here in ASEAN countries, need to see investments that will secure their future, both their economic well-being and the well-being of the environment and nature that supports them. The Asian Development Bank speaks about the need to attain a triple win, building infrastructure that reduces emissions and climate risk, while stimulating economic development and increasing returns for investors at the same time. This is certainly something that FinDev Canada is focused on, including in sectors like renewable energy, sustainable transportation, and water projects. FinDev Canada is our bilateral development finance institution. It supports sustainable growth through the private sector by providing financing, investment, and blended finance solutions, as well as technical assistance. Last year, during the launch of Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy, we announced a further $750 million in global capitalization for FinDev. In May, FinDev Canada signed an agreement with the Asian Development Bank to enhance cooperation on sustainable private sector investments across the region. And this week, we're announcing that FinDev will be opening a new office here in the Indo-Pacific. These initiatives will support high-quality, high-standard, sustainable infrastructure. Canada will continue to leverage the expertise of our private sector and invest in growth that benefits all sides, including through technical capacity building. FinDev Canada's efforts in the region will create growth and improve the well-being of people. And it's just one tool in our toolbox to support good projects. We're also investing in infrastructure through other means. For example, here in Indonesia, we're supporting the Karian Sepong water supply project that will help provide reliable and safe, clean drinking water to over 2 million people. In the provinces of East Nusa Tenggara and Maluku, we're supporting a project that will connect an additional 2 million people to the electrical grid while scaling up solar power investments and lowering the cost of power generation by 20%. Canada's financing helped make this project feasible, and contributions from all parties helped catalyze $400 million US from the private sector. These initiatives will help mitigate the effects of climate change while creating economic growth at the same time. In other words, we're keeping people safe while creating jobs and prosperity. Bâtir un avenir durable et prospère ensemble, mais ça fait partie des objectifs de la stratégie du Canada pour l'Indo-Pacifique. Our Indo-Pacific strategy is centered on creating jobs and opportunities for everyone. Canadian companies and investors, as well as our scientists and researchers, are well positioned to work with ASEAN partners to foster innovative solutions. We will continue to contribute to the region's growing infrastructure needs and deploy our environmental expertise in areas such as ocean management, disaster risks and resilience, biodiversity, and clean energy. Canada has what it takes to help ASEAN attain its goals. I just mentioned clean energy. Canada is becoming the reliable supplier of clean energy a net zero world needs. More than ever in these challenging times, we need resilient supply chains, stable trading relationships, and alignment on values. This is about securing the resources that our economies and citizens rely on, whether that's energy or raw materials or food. Canada is a reliable partner. It's not a coincidence that we have 15 free trade agreements that cover 61% of the world's GDP and open markets to 1.5 billion consumers worldwide. And we're negotiating more trade deals, including with ASEAN and right here with our Indonesian hosts. Canada has ambitious, educated workers. Our immigration policies are attracting highly skilled talent, and we have incredible natural resources. Canada is one of the world's largest food exporters and can contribute to ASEAN food security. And we're among the world's largest exporters of fertilizer. We're also a responsible supplier of critical minerals that make everything from solar panels to battery packs. A responsible supplier means that we have high safety standards and environmental protections, because that's the way the world is going. We need to remember to put people at the center of everything we do, including by investing to make sure our workers will have great jobs, not just now, but for generations to come, whether it's to produce electric vehicles or clean steel. When people are doing well, when we make sure the middle class is thriving, we foster security and stability. And stability is a key element of supply chain resilience. It benefits everyone. That's one of the things we have to focus on so much right now. Understanding that insecurity and instability around the world is one of the greatest challenges, not just to economies, but to democracies. When people don't feel secure, secure in their own jobs, secure within their community, feel secure for their kids or for their path to retirement, they become more vulnerable to populist thinking, to authoritarianism, to being swayed by the misinformation and disinformation that surrounds them every day on social media. People are anxious. No wonder people are anxious. The world is changing now harder and faster than it ever has. Pandemic, climate change, global conflicts, reorienting geostability, uncertain economics, the rise of AI and automation putting jobs at risk. No wonder people are worried. No wonder people are anxious. No wonder people are looking for any solutions they can. And what we need as leaders, whether it's political leaders or business leaders, is to show people that there is room for them in the future we're all building together. People see the future as change. They see change is coming to the world. They just aren't sure that there's room for them in that future. And that goes at the very core of the idea of promise, that the idea of progress and that promise that is central to our economies, to our institutions, to our national well-beings. The idea that the hard work of one generation makes things better and easier for the next generation. Our parents all worked hard for us to be able to end up in a room like this at a time like this. And all of us are working really hard, but parents everywhere are unsure that tomorrow's opportunities are really going to be greater for their kids because so much else is changing. And that's why offering reliability, stability, a sense that even as everything is changing, we've got this. Our institutions are seeing how the world is going, seeing where the weaknesses are, and pulling together to say, no, you can't just choose what's good for the environment or what's good for the economy. They have to go together. And you can't just know that trade deals create growth. That growth that's created needs to be shared equitably across citizens, across communities, because if not, people pull their support away for pro-growth policies. What we have to do, business and government together, is make sure we are showing our workers, our citizens, our neighbors, our kids, that there is a path forward into a brighter future that features them at the center of it. Remembering the impact on people of everything we do is central, not just to our short-term success, but to our long-term success as friends and neighbors. And I say neighbors, of course, because Indonesia and Canada are neighbors. Canada is a Pacific nation. The Indo-Pacific is our neighborhood. And by engaging and investing in this partnership, we're looking out at the horizon of the Indo-Pacific future with a clear view of the shared prosperity that lies ahead for Canadians and for people throughout this region. Je dis souvent que la promesse du Canada, c'est d'améliorer le niveau de vie pour chaque génération. As I just said, the promise of Canada, the promise of progress, is always one that we can make things better for the next generation than it was for the last. But that promise is not unique to Canada. It should be a promise we make to everyone, everywhere. So as we look towards the future, as we look to invest in the future, let us make sure we're remembering that progress, that promise of progress, that things are supposed to get better 1 year to the next, 1 generation to the next. And none of us can sit back and hope it'll just happen on its own, or the right government will make it happen on its own, or the right business will show up and make it happen on its own. That it only happens when we understand the role that every single one of us, civil society, business, the public sector, political leadership, all have in working together to create that better future we all need. Merci beaucoup, mes chers amis. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Trudeau, as we extend our sincere gratitude for your time and your presence. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise as Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada leaves the premises. Once again, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude for the time and presence of Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we will proceed to our next session in 5 minutes. Once again, to our distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our next session within 5 minutes. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we kindly invite for all delegates and participants to please be seated as we would like to embark on our next session in the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum, Subtheme 2, Sustainable and Innovative Financing. We thank you for your attention. Once again, we kindly invite distinguished delegates, participants, ladies and gentlemen. As we would like to proceed to our next agenda, we kindly invite for all of you ladies and gentlemen to please be seated. Thank you. And now, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we will proceed to the briefer session. Hence, we kindly invite for all distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, to please remain seated. Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, our next agenda is a short yet comprehensive presentation on the topic Accelerating Green Transition, the Role of Indonesia and ASEAN by the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Republic of Indonesia. Please help me welcome Mr. Pahala Nugraha Mansuri.
Thank you, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I think this is probably one of the harder sessions because following up after such a rock star like Prime Minister Trudeau, of course. But I hope I will be able to give you a little bit of briefing about highlighting some figures, particularly on the global terms on the energy transition, especially because the next session is going to discuss about how is it that we are going to be able to provide sustainable and innovative financing to develop the energy transition. Last year, the clean energy sets another new record. Bloomberg report shows that the global energy investment for the first time surged past $1.1 trillion. More than 3,372 gigawatts of new capacity was added, mostly from wind and solar power, and almost all of those are actually new capacity added in Asia. Worldwide employment in renewable energy reached 12.7 million, a jump of about 700,000 new jobs in a year. So what do these figures actually tell us? I want to highlight 3 points. First, renewable energy is the fuel of the future. Second, energy is no longer a commodity, but it is actually the driver of economic growth. And third, that there is actually a global race towards low carbon economy transition, and ASEAN wants to be at the center of those transitions. With ASEAN's combined GDP near 3.7 trillion US dollar and a population of more than 670 million people, we want to ensure that our South Asia region can become the epicenter of growth, which is exactly the theme of today's summit. And we understand that sustainable development is the key to future prosperity. And that is why during our ASEAN chairmanship, Indonesia has been pushing for sustainable and collaborative efforts to accelerate the green energy transition. And there are 3 priorities. First, investing and developing in the green economy. This, of course, will require significant technological support and financing. In this regard, there have been numerous initiatives for sustainable and innovative financing. The region hosts more than 80 green initiatives valued at 34 billion US dollar. Among the many regional initiatives are the ASEAN Power Grid Initiative, the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance, as well as the JETP, introduced last year in the G20 Bali Summit. From all of these initiatives, we must ensure that green technology becomes a public good. I hope through AIPF we can work closely with the private sector, public sector in ensuring investment for the development of affordable green technology. Second, utilizing the massive potential of the blue economy. More than 66% of Southeast Asia total area is covered by ocean and the sea. Our region is also home to 15% of the world fishery. It is estimated that the blue economy can generate between 3 to 6 trillion US dollar and about 260 million jobs per year. To unlock the blue economy's potential, last year Indonesia successfully launched the Blue Hello Ocean program, targeting 300 million US dollar in blended finance to ensure economic growth aligns with maritime conservation. Third, accelerating the digital transformation. Our region has a promising potential for digitization. ASEAN's digital economy is expected to reach 1 trillion US dollar by 2030. This year, ASEAN leaders also endorsed the Digital Economic Framework Agreement, or DEFA. Having the DEFA in place will double the region's digital economy potential to about 2 trillion US dollar by the year 2030, driven by the transformation of AI, blockchain, and connectivity in digital payment system, especially the CRIS system. Excellencies, distinguished delegates and participants, all of us here are important stakeholders in ASEAN's endeavor in the pursuit towards low carbon economy. Our cooperation must focus on how we can build shared future, and the key word here is collaboration. Rest assured, Indonesia remains strongly committed to ensure full implementation of the many initiatives and agreed cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Mr. Pahala Nugra, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Republic of Indonesia, for presenting the accelerating green transition, the role of Indonesia and ASEAN. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to our next panel discussion, we'd like to kindly once again remind our delegates and ladies and gentlemen to switch off your telecommunication device to the silent or vibrant mode. And also, we'd like to kindly also remind you that we do have a couple of panel discussion later on in the day. So we kindly invited to all delegates and also ladies and gentlemen to stay right here at the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum throughout our session. And also, we'd like to say thank you to our partners, Bank Rakyat Indonesia, Pertamina, PT PLN Persero, Bank Negara Indonesia, Bank Mandiri, Mind ID, Telkom Indonesia, InJourney, Area, British Chamber of Commerce Indonesia, Google, Indonesian Business Council, PT Sun Cable Indonesia, Standard Chartered, ASEAN Food and Beverages Alliance, ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, Canada ASEAN Business Council, European Union Delegation to ASEAN, Google Arts and Culture, Lembaga Penjamin Simpanan, ROK Mission, U.S. ASEAN Business Council, World Intellectual Property Organization, ADB, Amazon, Bloomberg Net, Booking.com, Coca, Netflix, Thales, and Zoom that had fully supported the event of ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum implementation of the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. And of course, to all of you delegates, participants, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, attendance, and presence for the second day of the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum. As of right now, we are now still in the second sub-theme, or sub-theme 2, the sustainable and innovative financing. We will have a couple of discussion, and we hope these discussions are very insightful and fruitful for you. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on our next panel, we'll discuss green financing and carbon market. And we'd like to invite our fellow distinguished speakers on stage for this panel. Ibu Alexandra Askandar, as Vice President Director of Bank Mandiri. Can we have applause, please, ladies and gentlemen, for Ibu Alexandra Askandar? We kindly invite Ibu Natalia Rialuki, CEO of Ferramats. Welcome, Ibu Natalia. We'd like to kindly invite Mr. Jeffrey Chatelier, CEO of Forest Carbon. And we would like to also invite Mr. Ma Jun, Director at the Institute of Public and Environment Affairs. And without further ado, please help me to welcome the moderator for this session, BBC Asia Business Correspondent, Mr. Nick Mash. Mr. Marsh, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our third panel discussion of the day. My name is Nick. I'm the BBC's Asia business correspondent. I'm normally based out of Singapore. We have our hub there. The topic of today's panel discussion is green financing and carbon markets. We've got a really great panel. I think they bring a real range of perspectives. They represent various concerns, also different steps along the chain of carbon markets, shall we say, as they relate today. So I'm just going to quickly introduce them. Here to my left, we have Alexandra Askandar. She is the Vice President Director of Bank Mandiri. Thank you very much for being here. Next to Alexandra, we have Natalia Rialuki. She's CEO of Ferratmos. Nice to have you here, Natalia. We've got next to her, just along, we've got Jeffrey Chatelier, CEO of Forest Carbon. Now, you guys are all based here in Indonesia, Jakarta, obviously. But we're very pleased to have from Beijing, Dr. Ma Jun. Dr. Ma Jun is the Director of the Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs. Thank you very much. We'll just give them a quick round of applause. Thank you for all being here. Now, in terms of green financing, I think carbon markets is one of the most exciting, if not the most exciting, sort of way of getting a path towards net zero without messing up the economy. right? I mean, I think that's basically the very, very blunt way of putting it. It's a really nice, simple idea, the idea that polluting companies and governments can literally pay for carbon credits to compensate for their emissions, and on the other hand, those organizations, companies, governments that are doing good things for the environment, they sell the carbon credits as a reward. So it's like a carrot and stick approach, right? And then the people in the middle investing, buying, trading, and as everyone gets more and more invested in net zero, these carbon credits increase in value, everyone gets rich, our targets are all met, problem solved. Well, I'm sure our panel is going to tell me, Nick, no, that's a really simplistic way of looking at it. There are still concerns. No system is perfect. In some areas, there's no system at all. And there's also controversies around the carbon market in and of itself. But look, I'm going to start with you, Alexandra, because I want you to tell us a little bit about your clients in the financial sector at Bank Mandiri. How much enthusiasm are you seeing from them? Do they want to be buying and investing in carbon credits?
Okay, thank you, Nick, for the questions. But before I answer the question, I would like to greet all the participants joining us this afternoon. Okay, as the largest wholesale banking in Indonesia, we manage a huge loan portfolio from various industry sectors. And of course, there are high-emitting business as well as more greener sectors, like renewable energy, clean transportation, and so on. And we've seen a positive, great enthusiasm for the carbon market. Although currently it's not applied yet in Indonesia. We don't have the carbon exchange yet, but it has been quite extensive and intensive, I could say, discussion to prepare for this carbon exchange. And we, even us, as the bank, we see that our role can be also positive in this carbon exchange. Why? Because we can connect. We can be the intermediary to connect between the seller and the purchaser of the buyer of this carbon credit.
Yeah. So as and when this becomes an option, there is the enthusiasm there. There is the market.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, Natalia, I'm going to ask you about Fair Atmos. Now, I'm just going to give a brief description of what you guys do. Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong here. So you have a digital tool. It helps farmers if they want to become carbon certified. Yeah. Right? So farmers can actually prove that what they're doing isn't polluted, and then they can sell carbon credits. Yeah. Off the back of that. We were talking the other day, and you said that what you wanted to do, this idea of returning confidence to carbon markets, that's part of what you're looking to do. Does that suggest then that at the moment there isn't enough confidence in carbon markets?
That's correct. Maybe I try to decipher the two problems in the market. The first one is we don't have enough quality carbon credit projects. In Indonesia itself, we have big potential, but why don't we have 100 projects, 200 projects? So we really want to make it very easy to really assess any given plot of land. Indonesia has more than 90 million hectares of forestry, 12 million hectares of agriculture forestry as well. Why don't they also can get a bit of carbon credit if they switch the way they plant to be more carbon neutral, to be more low emission, right? So one, we don't have enough of those projects. Number two, just recently, earlier this year, there has been a huge criticism in the carbon offset world, which in my view, I think it's good for the industry because we keep on checking with each other, right? So there has been a lot of projects that were questioned whether it is actually protecting the environment or not, because some project was credited, but apparently it has been converted into commercial use. Now, the second problem that we're facing is a lot of buyers become skeptical. A lot of large corporations in Europe, who becomes one of the bigger market for carbon credits, actually pull out entirely, divesting from their investment in carbon credits because of this criticism. In my view, and in what Atmos does, carbon offset still becomes one of the most accessible way for people to obtain economic value out of conservation. So why don't we return the confidence of the market to carbon offset by providing more transparency, that if you are paying a carbon credit to plant that tree somewhere in Cilacap, for example, as one of our projects, the tree is there. We can see in one screen, the tree is there. It's like 10 centimeters right now. We give you a calculation for a 10 centimeters mangrove with rhizoporous species, for example, how much carbon does it actually sequester? So we really believe that previously there wasn't technology, but now with new technology, we can actually see the same thing. So then it's no longer a bilateral transaction that believes in hopes and papers, but actually in real image, satellite image that can tell you, yes, you are conserving, yes, you are worth of that economic value, because this economic value goes hand in hand with preserving the planet.
Yeah, yeah. So seeing is believing.
Yes, it is true.
Essentially. Jeffrey, I wanted to ask you whether you saw that same kind of skepticism. I mean, Fair Atmos has been going for about a year.
Yes.
Right? You've been in this carbon credits game a little bit longer. I mean, how do you deal with skepticism? Is this something that you see on a regular basis? I'm sure things have changed quite a lot, right? I mean, the value of a carbon credit's gone up a lot in the last few years. You know, how do you deal when people say, well, what's all this about? How do you persuade people?
Yeah, thank you. I think one thing to think about is that in ASEAN, we've had a really vibrant carbon market being developed over the last decade. When Indonesia hosted the Bali climate negotiations and really launched the development of the nature-based solutions sector, we saw a proliferation of projects. And so within ASEAN, there's already around 1.5 million hectares of forest that's being protected and restored using international standards that are trusted by the market. And these projects, to date, have produced over 125 million credits that have been transacted with major Fortune 500 companies. On the renewable energy side, there's roughly 54 projects producing on average 7 million credits a year. So this market has been here and it's been building over time. And so in terms of trust of the market, it's important that you use methodologies that are trusted, that are transparent, and can be checked by third-party auditors. And so that's really where I think the market needs to go. On the technology side, we've seen with space technology, the proliferation of satellites, that it's much easier to check on the activities of these projects. Many years ago, it would cost tens of thousands of dollars for one single satellite image. Now these images are free and anyone can download them. And so this is allowing citizen scientists to come in and really ensure the integrity of these projects. But with anything, I think these methodologies can be improved, they can be worked on, and we can engage with the scientific community to build more trust in the sector.
Yeah, yeah. Marjin, I wanted to get the China perspective. I don't want to be that guy that says this is all well and good, but unless we get China on board, but I am going to be that guy. I'm going to ask, what is the state of the carbon market in China at the moment? Are you satisfied?
Yeah, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be invited to this forum. Very, very impressed. And talking about carbon market, China launched the carbon market after the government made carbon peak and neutrality pledge in September 2020. So 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago, we launched the carbon market. And so it's considered to be one of the alternative, one of the ways to do it. You either impose a carbon tax or you depend on the carbon trade market. So China chose this way of doing this. At the beginning, the plan was more ambitious. 8 industries and many other industries. But toward the beginning of that, we decided to go with only one industry, the thermal power industry. So bringing into more than 2,200 thermal power, the coal power plants, but they are really major emitters. The total volume put together is some 4.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide. And that's about more than 1/3 of the total, China's total carbon emission. And so making it one of the largest markets. Having said that, the price was not that, the transaction was not that vibrant, and the price remained to be rather low. It started from 40 RMB, but in more recent days, actually just from this August, the August that just passed, the treat volume increased to 13 million tons that month, and then the carbon price increase from 40 to 70. So it's on its way to go up, and more industries being considered to be integrated into this market. Iron, steel, cement, and non-ferrous metal like aluminium and others. Chemical and petrochemical would be more challenging. Talking about China's experience, probably it's relevant to the Indonesian market. Alexandra told me that you're going to launch your own market. I think it's relevant because in China we haven't picked it yet. We set the target 2030. So before you have a real cap, how to manage, how to construct a real effective carbon market, that's our challenge. And then we all talk about the integrity of the data, the quality of the project. In China, it's the same. The reason for us to start it with coal power is because this is the most straightforward. Mm-hmm. You send a sample of coal to the lab regularly, and then you come up with emission factors and come up with your data. But when it comes to other industries, it's going to be a lot more complicated. For example, chemical and petrochemical. So that's our, some of our experience. And even with the coal power, we spent the first half of this year to try to review some of the fraudulent case, because it's really quite a big temptation for the third party to bow to the pressure of those who join the market to cheat on their data. So it matters to millions or hundreds of millions of yuan. So that's another thing that we could learn, I think, from the Chinese market. But after 2 years, I think gradually China feel more confident that we're going to expand and allow more transaction, particularly when in Europe the CBAM, the carbon border adjustment tax, is looming. So I think that could also help hasten China's efforts to develop our own market. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to come back down the line, actually. I'll go to you next, Jeffrey, if that's okay, because I want to talk a little bit about regulation and, the confusion, around regulation here in Indonesia. There was a bit of a pause on trading voluntary credits. Are you clear on the Indonesian government's approach to carbon credits? Is that something that you're clear on at the moment, and you feel like everyone is?
To answer that question, over the past few years, we've seen new regulations coming out in Indonesia that clearly identify that there will be a carbon market and that trading will take place between B2B. We also may see transactions taking place between governments. And so the regulations indicate that the government wants to know more about this sector. They want to know how many credits are being produced, who's producing them, what type of standards they're using. And so I think it's a positive indicator that there's going to be more oversight on the sector. But as you mentioned, there are some challenges right now because the system isn't fully operational. But with recent regulations that have come out from the Financial Authority indicating that carbon exchanges will be up and running before the end of Q3 this year, those are really positive signs that the government is getting very much behind it. I think an interesting point is some of the participants in the carbon market in Indonesia are state-owned enterprises. So that's very much a signal that the government is supportive of what we're doing. And I think they can look also outside to other ASEAN countries. Cambodia is a good example where they've adopted the voluntary carbon market as their national strategy. And they understand that they have to create a product that buyers are willing to pay for. And in that situation, they're adopting international standards. So they're not trying to recreate the wheel. And as a result, they've protected, close to 1 million hectares. They've generated hundreds of millions of dollars for their country, and they're looking to expand that further. And so I think it's a good example for Indonesia to see and to look at and potentially emulate. And so I think that's the direction of where the market is going.
Do you agree with that, Natalia? That's the general direction towards a sort of a clearer approach.
Yeah, so I do think that it gives a lot of confidence that the statements and the direction about now that the regulation on carbon trading from the OJK is out, and then there's more regulation from the Ministry of Forestry that is setting up its own registry to put more provisions. I think one area that, if I may, need a little bit more nudge is on the climate financing side. So it's not enough to just allow how climate projects is being developed. What's the science behind how much carbon tons can one forest actually protect, right? But in order to do such activity requires a quite high capital expenditures. And we've been talking, and we would love to, work more with a lot of banks as well as financing companies, but particularly also on the financing regulatory side within Indonesia, on how we can incentivize more financing to climate projects, because the nature is not a typical retail loan. It takes 2 years, or in the case of Darsono, it takes 15 years from the start of the project until you see your first dollar. Yeah. So it is a quite a long time. And every time we ask, okay, when we pitch about, can you help us finance? We are currently helping to build 10 projects and raising almost $50 million US in terms of capex to finance this project, right? Every time we ask, the questions from funder has always been, how do I manage my risk? Is there any insurance about it, right? So how do I protect all this capex I put it up front? So I guess if the carbon projects regulation, the trading regulation is there, I think we're waiting for the financing regulation to really put more safeguards so that funders can be more comfortable, but also gives a bit more room for project developers to really have a bit of booster, so that people who previously log, people who previously just know how to open palm oil plantation, can see that there's also confidence and trust from the financial industry for them to convert what they do towards protecting and conserving. So we're hoping for that long tail of regulatory changes would happen and can boost more projects in the sector.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you for your pitch in a minute, but you mentioned finance and you mentioned banks, so I'm going to bring you in, Alexandra. I mean, the key thing is to get people on board, offering green portfolios, this sort of thing. How much success have you had in that so far? What kinds of things do you offer to your clients?
Okay. From my point of view, I think incentives as well as intervention and policy interventions are necessity if we want to see the transition to low carbon economy, sustainable economy. So, for example, I believe that a proper carbon pricing mechanism will be the main driver to create more green financing. Because everybody will be pushed to apply the green investment. So in this case, Indonesia has not yet, we haven't applied the carbon tax yet, but we've seen a positive development. The authorities have piloted energy transition, energy trading system in energy sector, for example. And the government also provided incentive in EV ecosystem, like relaxation on the VAT, and then relaxation on the domestic component, and also the relaxation on different type of policies. So I believe this incentive and the policies are the things that we need, and we can also adopt, like Jeffrey said, from what has been applied in international, especially in the region, from ASEAN countries. We see that Singapore, they have been successful. They have introduced the carbon tax in 2019, and now we've seen a large green investment in Singapore compared to other ASEAN countries. So I think we will move forward into this direction. Indonesia will move forward into this direction.
Yeah, thank you. You're a backer of the carbon tax, aren't you, Jeffrey? Just explain why, how that works.
Yeah, so a carbon tax can be a really good way to incentivize financial flows into activities that reduce emissions. And so, as Natalie was saying, right now, nature-based solutions, the primary funding source is venture capital, right? So traditional banks aren't willing to invest in these projects because there isn't enough price assurance on the credits. And so one way to help give more stability on pricing of carbon credits is to align it with a carbon tax. So for example, Singapore is about to increase its carbon tax from just under $4 to over $33 in 2026. Now, if Singapore created a system similar to what Colombia has already done, where it set a carbon tax and then it allowed companies, instead of paying that tax, to buy carbon offsets, it could really stimulate the entire market across ASEAN. Now, if we were able to get $33 a carbon credit from a nature-based solution project here in Indonesia, we could protect and restore the entire forestry estate, which is over 100 million hectares. So, the scale can be huge. And when we, add on the forests of Myanmar, Vietnam, Laos, Malaysia, the opportunity is quite large. So Indonesia has a preliminary plan to roll out a carbon tax, and I think that could be a first step, for its domestic carbon market trading. So I see, really strong promise. I think these taxes indicate to the market where prices are going and bring more stability to the market.
Yeah. Margin, is that something you'd go along with as well?
Yeah, China is also going through all these methodologies. China stopped our own CCER, the China Carbon Emission Reduction Mechanism, a couple of years ago, due to the idea that we need to maintain the integrity, and we really need to get the methodology right and make it align with international standards. And now the Chinese Ministry of Environment have openly solicited the stakeholders to come up with their own proposals for this methodology for the first time. And China's own carbon emission reduction system will be restarted, hopefully this year. Yeah, so that will be the situation. Having said that, I think another thing that which is relevant is that in China, our green finance started longer time ago. When the countries really suffer from severe pollution problem, air and water problem. I landed the day before yesterday, and yesterday I checked our readings. We have a Blue Map app, and on that readings I can see the concentration of PM 2.5 here, and local people told me that it was just a normal day, but our annual average when we got started in Beijing, 2013, that was double that yesterday's readings. So it's 89.5, and the WHO standards was 10 at that time. So hundreds of millions exposed to this air pollution. And then on the water side, when our organization was set up 17 years ago, 28% of the monitored river sections reported worse than Category 5, meaning the water is running black, good for no use, exposed 300 million rural residents to health risks. So that was our situation. So in China, green finance is not just about trying to direct all this money to curb the carbon emission. It started by trying to direct the money to help with all this infrastructure and green infrastructure built, and of course add the pipe, pollution reduction projects. And through all these years of efforts, some success have been achieved. In 10 years of time, Beijing's PM 2.5 dropped from nearly 90 to 30 last year. And on the water side, that 28% of black water proportion dropped to 1%, around 1% in just over the past 10 years. So it's quite achievement. And now, how do we, when we try to cut our carbon emission, how to synergize the carbon emission reduction with the local pollution control? Because if we want to further improve, because WHO just lowered its health standards to 5 when it comes to PM 2.5. If we want to further improve, we need more investment, but we better do that side by side with the tackling the climate change. So how do we synergize carbon reduction with the local pollution control, expansion of green, and sustainable growth? I mean, that's the priority in China. Financial institutions have been motivated to try to do that. We as an NGO organization is trying to build the infrastructure, tracking the performance of some more than 10 million corporations operating in China with their production and emission, and then help those banks run through 1 million of them who want to borrow money, following our, in the environmental due diligence, following China's green banking policy, and develop digital solutions, digital accounting solutions, because we all want to lower the cost of all this green transition. The premium, if it is too high, then for a developing country, emerging market country, it will be a problem. So I think all this, I'm very excited to see all these efforts happening here in China. The renewable energy sector grow by the solar PV. Solar PV grow by 42% year on year in the first 7 months of this year. And then the e-vehicles penetration rate topped 25%. Every 4 cars sold, one of them is an e-vehicle. Yesterday when I checked the street, it was still not like that. But so I think there are a lot of things that we can try to review and see whether there are synergy to work together.
Yeah, so it could be a huge potential avenue as a driver of growth in China, renewables. Natalia, I said I'd ask you for your pitch, because you are a startup. How do you go about persuading, businesses, funds, VCs and stuff like that? How do you go about explaining to them that this is something worth investing in?
Yeah, so I think since we have a very short time, I think there's only one planet. 1 carbon ton of carbon dioxide captured in Indonesia is 1 carbon ton of dioxide captured on Earth that can save our future, right? And not only one planet, but also one global economic system. Fortunately or unfortunately, forest across the world is distributed quite unevenly, where Southeast Asia has most of the forest after Amazon. But then in order for us to value this forest potential, we need countries who has less of them to see and become the buyer of what is more available in this region. So we need to be able to find ways to help more people to create carbon projects to absorb, but also allow the finance to come and support all of these projects, so that not only that the planet is conserved, but also economic value for people who choose to do it is being priced at the fair value. So technology now allows us to do that. Technology now, like what Jeffrey also mentioned, that previously took 2 years could now be done in 2 seconds. So why don't we help each other to basically create more high quality projects for who knows however years that we have left in this planet. So yeah, maybe that's my pitch.
Good pitch. It's under 1 minute, I think.
Oh, not half a minute, so efficient.
You practiced that one. We just heard a bit about the sort of green financial sector in China from Ma Jun there, and areas for improvement and development. What's the state of affairs here in Indonesia, and even more generally regionally, if you want to comment?
Okay, I would like to quote what Natalia said about the role of the financial institution, particularly the banks. So, recognizing the essential role of banks, we in Bank Mandiri, we would like to be the Indonesia's sustainability champion. And how we see our role is not limited to how we create green financing, but how we can integrate the ESG, the sustainable, into our daily business, our operational activities, and more importantly, how we can also assist and help our client for their transition journey. And as of June 2023, our sustainable portfolio has reached to 15.9 billion US dollar, and part of it is the green financing portfolio. And among those green financing portfolio consists of renewable energy, clean transportation, sustainable agriculture, and many other green business. And LRT, if you are aware, which was just launched last week, is one of our green financing, part of our green financing portfolio. And in Bank Mandiri, we also have a dedicated team, ESG unit. We just created last year. And with our financial expertise, we also give advisory to our client. So we provide services, how they can issue sustainability linked loan, green loan, social loan, as well as transition loan for various industry sectors like cement industry, and then mining contractors, and other industry sector. And to make sure that we have the liquidity to support our green financing, we also create an initiative on how we have green funding. So in Bank Mandiri, we issued green bond in, we issued sustainability bond in 2021, and the following year we are the first bank who issued the ESG repo, and the total is quite huge. And this year, just a couple of months ago, we issued green bond in rupiah. The total is 5 trillion rupiah.
So there's appetite for that then, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Okay, we've got 3 minutes. Jeffrey, I'm going to ask you a question and see if we can squeeze in one more for Margin. We'll see how we go.
All right.
Look, I mean, forests is your area. Currently, the carbon credits that are being issued represent a real fraction. We were talking about this the other day, right? Of Indonesia's total land mass of forests. How are you going to scale that up? How are you going to? We were talking about the danger of the carbon market being niche. How do you stop it being niche?
Yeah, so the sector has been a niche sector for the past, 10 years. And, as I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons for that is because most of the financing comes from venture-based investors who are looking for fairly high returns and quick returns. And so for the sector to mature, we need to expand the financing opportunities. Again, looking at how to de-risk these projects, how to make them more bankable. There was a topic brought up on insurance. Right now, large-scale forest restoration and conservation projects don't have access to fire insurance. This would be one mechanism that could help reduce overall risk. The other is on price stability. And so a carbon tax method could be one avenue to ensure that projects have long-term price stability and buyers for these credits. And so once that takes place, we're going to see a lot more traditional commercial banks like Mandiri. We've got Standard Chartered. And I think that's going to open up this sector to small and medium enterprises within the forestry sector. And once that happens, I think we're going to see the Indonesian forestry estate be protected and restored at a much faster rate. But the model is there. There's 500,000 hectares in Indonesia that have been protected and restored and generating millions of carbon credits annually. So it's proven to the market that it works. And now we need to scale that up with the support of the wider financial community.
Okay, thank you very much. Margin, I'm going to have to ask you this question after the panel. I think we'll run out of time. If we can quickly, I just had a personal interest in China's investing in a record-breaking way in renewables, but it's also really scaling up with coal plants. Can you explain, from looking from the outside, what's happening there?
Yeah, put it into historic perspective. When in our dealing with our air pollution, but prior to that year, 2013, our coal consumption got tripled between 2000 to 2012, just that short period of time. But ever since then, it nearly got stabilized. So in some way, we have made some progress, made contribution to the fighting against climate change. Still, we're burning half the world's coal. Our emission is about 30% of the global total. So it's still way too high. And now, how do we, find ways to try to hasten the process? Originally, we thought we can depend on some transitional energy sources like natural gas or shale gas. But then the geopolitical tension, pandemic, and turbulent global energy market make everyone to prioritize energy security, food security, and the supply chain security. So all of a sudden, every one of the decision maker try to ensure the energy security by authorizing a whole series of coal power plants. Our idea, of course, is to try to see, with a vast development, 42% of solar PV in the first 7 months. With that level of development, our 2030 target will be achieved by 2025, no doubt about that. And EV. So with all of this, I hope that eventually all this new coal power plant could only serve as the backup. They will run on very low operating hours. Of course, it means our transitional cost will be very high. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Marjun. Thank you very much for that. Good to get a non-ASEAN perspective as well on this panel. Thank you very much, Alexandra, Natalia, Jeffrey, Dr. Marjun, and thank you very much to you for this very nice panel on green financing and carbon markets.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please give a big round of applause to our moderator, Mr. Nick Marsh, and also to our esteemed speakers that was discussing for this panel in green financing and carbon market. Once again, can we have an applause, please, for our moderator, Mr. Nick Marsh, and also our speakers for this panel discussion. And before we proceed to our next panel, we'd like to say and extend our sincere and thanks to each of our sponsors for their invaluable support. Bank Rakyat Indonesia, Pertamina, PT PLN Persero, Bank Negara Indonesia, Bank Mandiri, Mind ID, Telkom Indonesia, InJourney, Area, British Chamber of Commerce Indonesia, Google, Indonesian Business Council, PT Sun Cable Indonesia, Standard Chartered, ASEAN Food and Beverages Alliance, ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, Canada ASEAN Business Council, European Union Delegation to ASEAN, Google Arts and Culture, Lembaga Penjaminan Simpanan, ROK Mission, U.S. ASEAN Business Council, World Intellectual Property Organization, ADB, Amazon, Bloomberg Nerve, Booking.com, Coca, Netflix, Thales and Zoom, Batik Chic, to support our event of ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum implementation of the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. And once again, thank you to all sponsors for the unwavering support. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, once again, before we proceed to our next panel, we kindly invite you to be seated as we would like to embark on our next panel. Ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished panelists, once again, to our distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we're moving along to our third panel, in which this panel will discuss on accelerating the mobilization of the business sector through sustainable and innovative financing. We'd like to invite our moderator for this panel, the President of the British Chamber of Commerce of Indonesia, Bapak Rino Dono Seputro. Can we have an applause, please, for our moderator for this panel, ladies and gentlemen? We'd like to invite our distinguished speakers, Bapak Rida DM Wirakusuma, CEO of INA. We'd like to also kindly invite Ms. Alice Carr, Executive Director, Public Policy and JETP Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Mr. Justin Wu, Managing Director, Co-Head of Climate Change Asia Pacific of HSBC. Mr. Jiro Tominaga, Country Director, ADB Indonesia. And Ms. Nadaram Pachim Sawat, Executive Vice President of Bangkok Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have an applause for our speaker for this panel, accelerating the mobilization of the business sector through sustainable and innovative financing. Without further ado, we'll give the floor to our moderator, Bapak Rino Dono Seputro.
Thank you, and a very good afternoon. It's always a daunting task, right? We got the graveyard shift as the last panel of the whole entire ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum series of events the last 2 days, but we'll try to make this very interesting and very insightful for you still. just a quick context. We're going to talk about sustainable and innovative financing. And I think at the heart of it, really, and you can see actually the distinguished speakers that we have over here are really the subject matter experts. We know how important sustainability is for ASEAN. There's significant opportunities for investment, but the point is that there's a significant financial gap. On the climate alone, by 2030, ASEAN would need an estimated amount of about close to $10 trillion just to meet the trajectory, to meet the Paris Agreement. And that is something actually that is very daunting actually. How do we bridge that capital? How do we create the right structure? Many of the projects may not necessarily be 100% commercially viable. So being very creative, innovative in the financing is the key. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, just wanted actually to briefly introduce some of our esteemed speakers. We got Pak Rida on my next. Wirakusuma, I think actually no need for an introduction, chairman of the Indonesian First Sovereign Wealth Fund, actually INA. Pak Rida is an experienced banker, whom I know personally as well, actually across many respects. He's a veteran and a senior in the banking industry as well before joining INA. And we got Alice Carr, fresh from London. Alice spent 20 years in the central bank, actually working on projects with Bank of England across the globe, and is the executive director of GFANZ. As you may have heard, GFANZ is the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, actually, who's been a key sort of a contributor in the Just Energy Transition Partnership programs across the world. We got Justin Wu, the head of climate change for HSBC, joining HSBC from Bloomberg NEF. So obviously a subject matter expert on the climate and sustainability side. Pak Jiro Tominaga, who's very well known in Indonesia, the country director for ADB. Again, ADB plays a very critical part in accelerating that innovative financing across the sustainability part, not just on the climate, but also on the social element as well. And last but not least is Kun Nadawan. Kun Nadawan is the head of the corporate banking for Bangkok Bank. And you can see Bangkok Bank has been expanding significantly across the region. And we'll talk more on that actually. But I'll start actually with the first question, if I may, actually to Pak Jiro. So Pak Jiro, how do you see this prospect of sustainable and innovative financing in ASEAN and maybe actually Indo-Pacific at large, since we are in the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum? Why are these type of financing are important and critical for businesses to grow and generate positive impact, either for the climate or environment, as well as social?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question, first of all. And then I also want to thank the organizer for inviting me for this, to join this very distinguished panel. I think the question is quite sort of high level in a sense that it sort of put the kind of the stage for the discussion, I guess. So let me just try to approach it in a little bit from various ways. First, I think it is just apparent that the climate change and then also the social issue is really a big issue that we need to deal with. It is really the defining issues for us for our generation to solve. And then it is particularly important for the Asia-Pacific region because if you think about the greenhouse gas emission of the world, more than 50% is coming from the Asian Pacific region. Now that when we try to address this issue, of course, there's a lot of financing is needed. Yeah. So I think we have all the numbers, different organizations making assessment with the different assumptions. For example, in our case, we did the study in 2017. For example, developing Asia requires $26 trillion for the investment in infrastructure with the climate sort of incorporated from 2016 to 2030. So that would be about $1.7 trillion a year. Yeah. And then also, but this is an estimate done 5 years ago. So the additional investment needs, et cetera, on the transition money and all these things that we're going to talk about, I think will be added from there. So I think that basically the bottom line is we need a lot of money. So in that context, for example, organizations like us, ADB, for example, has committed to provide $100 billion for the climate financing from 2019 to 2030. But at the same time, various governments and various other organizations are doing a similar thing. But the bottom line is that whatever the public sector side can bring in to the table is probably not going to be enough at all. I mean, it's a very small part of it. So that means the private sector financing has to come in. Now, in this context, I'm very kind of encouraged in a sense that recently there's a huge interest from the private sector side, both on the business and the financier side, about interest in investing and also channeling their money into the projects and activities that benefits the climate and social issues. I think the challenge for us here is basically how to create a system that channel this financing and resources into the sort of the project and activities that would bring benefit on the social and environmental and climate areas. I think we can do a lot of things. I think, of course, the policy and regulatory framework is very, very needed. And then also the capacity building for the institutions to come up with the project that is going to be sort of climate friendly, etc., is also important. Of course, the bankable project needs to be developed so that the financiers can have something to invest on. In that context, the innovative financing instruments, etc., is going to be one of the very important sort of aspects of it, so that to channel the money. And I think the crux of the matter seems to be that there is a growth sort of the paradigm that when you grow, GHG gas emission grows at the same time.
Yeah.
So we somehow need to sort of change that sort of correlation into we grow but reduce the greenhouse gas emission. And that decoupling is something that is very important, and we have to come up with a system in order for us to do that. And that basically what it means is that business can make basically profits out of doing business in the financial, in doing something good for the sustainability and reduction of greenhouse gas emission, and then also other social agenda that we have. So, so I think your question is basically why is it critical? I think it is very critical, so that the instrument, the innovative instrument, and the blended finance and all the things we're going to talk about is going to be critical. Just because in order for us to create a system that would pay for the businesses to come in and make investment.
Yeah, but can I have a quick follow-up question, actually, talking about the catalytic financing, particularly with the role that ADB played. To your point, why is it very critical? Do you have an example of a project in ASEAN that ADB actually has stepped in, for example, and make that a viable sort of project to go on?
Well, I mean, the catalytic financing sort of the mechanism that we have been trying to do. I think there's one sort of, you may have heard of the energy transition mechanism, which we started in terms of with the, the idea that didn't just come from ADB, actually it was been discussed in various areas, basically to use the concessional financing in order for, to making the early retirement and or repurposing of coal-fired power plant bankable, in a sense that because of bringing in the concessionality and with the blended finance mechanism, that would make it the sponsors and owner to curtail shorten the PPA agreement and then and stop the operation earlier than originally planned, but still keeping the net present value of the project intact. So that's something that we're trying to do, and we're working on the pilot transaction right now that would hopefully be able to demonstrate how this can be done and potentially be replicated by others.
Thank you, Pajero. Can I move to Alice? Alice, GFANS is a collective of these financial institutions, global financial institutions, with the focus of accelerating net zero. How do you see ASEAN? And again, actually, within the construct of that ASEAN sustainability, specifically this innovative financing or the financing structure, typically actually there's a lot of very difficult, quote unquote, actually projects that GFANS has been looking at, but it's actually very impactful to the environment in this case, actually. So how do you see the lay of the land, actually, and what's your perspective about ASEAN in that regard?
Thanks, Tony, and hopefully you can all hear me well. So GFANZ convenes about 650 financial institutions in 50 countries that have each individually committed to net zero by 2050, which is quite a big commitment. It's very difficult to deliver on. And if you're one of those institutions and you're taking this commitment seriously, you are now looking around the globe for financing opportunities that are transition aligned. And from the perspective of the financial system, transition is about the whole economy. So it's not just green and the most obvious kind of climate friendly solutions, although those are important. But really to deliver on this commitment, you have to kind of go where the emissions are and try and help corporates to manage them down. So for this region, there's lots of opportunity to attract finance to help solve for hard to abate sectors, to help manage high carbon activities down, and also to finance innovation and solutions that will help support transition and build the businesses of the future. And so what I have observed is that where financial institutions have made these commitments and have started to implement them, and they do that in a number of different ways, by engaging more actively with their clients on transition, by coming up with new products, by setting new KPIs for their senior teams, et cetera, that they are spending a lot more time helping clients and sectors to transition. So I think that offers an opportunity for the region. And I think it means that you can get your, and I hope they don't mind me saying this, but you can get your financial institutions to do some of your work for you to help you get these emissions down. Now, to be clear, it does require quite a bit of innovation, and some of that innovation has started in this region. It requires us to have new definitions of transition finance. It requires us to be better at measuring progress against the targets we're setting. So we need to be able to look at the financing provided and try and attribute decarbonization in the real economy to that finance. And this requires innovation in frameworks and approaches and metrics. Of course, ASEAN has made a big step by adapting the taxonomy approach that we've seen globally to try and capture a wider set of activities. But collectively, we still have a lot to do to be able to measure progress on decarbonization and show that the finance that's being provided to high carbon sectors is making a difference and is moving the dial.
Thanks, Alice. This whole sectoral perspective, I think actually that's something actually that is a good segue. Actually, Rita, if I can turn to you. You know that INA, the Indonesian Sovereign Wealth Fund, has a significant focus and also a significant key contributor in promoting sustainability and decarbonization in Indonesia and across the region as well. So can you share with us some specific strategies or criteria that you have in your decision-making process and making investment decisions, including green investments? And is there any specific type of project or sector that are more interesting for you to invest in? What are the potential opportunities across the mainstreaming of this sustainable, it's probably more innovative sort of financing in your view? Not just Indonesia, but across ASEAN.
Oh, thank you. I hope you can hear me okay. It's always extremely hard to listen while you are waiting to go after the whole full day. INA is Indonesia's first and only sovereign wealth fund, established about 2 years ago. We have a mandate to help Indonesia develop sustainably and at the same time making risk-adjusted returns.
Right.
The way we want to achieve both objectives is to put our money to work, but also at the same time bring other co-investors from everywhere to co-invest with us. Now, we have no limitation to invest, whether it is in Indonesia or in the UK or ASEAN or elsewhere. Of course, we will pay attention to those that actually could bring us the impact both to Indonesia as well as on the risk-adjusted returns. we determined that there are 4 different industry verticals that we are focusing on. One is infrastructure, second is healthcare, third is digital, and fourth is energy transition, which is kind of unique because we find that focusing on energy transition and renewables can also make good business sense. So our filter may be different than different investors, but for us, as we focus specifically on green investing, we have done a number of things since we established. We invested in the largest geothermal company in Asia, actually, alongside with one of the biggest renewable companies in the world, partly because Indonesia is blessed with a lot of volcanoes. And so, you know, aside from the fact that it shakes us a lot, but it also gives us a huge amount of energy from the earth. We also have now signed $1 billion, actually $2 billion electric vehicle fund, and that actually is going to invest in the whole value chain of EV. Number 3, we have announced an energy transition mechanism platform alongside with ADB to try to take out a lot of carbon-powered IPP, because yet again, Indonesia is extremely blessed with a lot of coal. So in so doing, we're trying to make sure that what we invest in really makes a difference through quite a number of innovative financings. We use blended financing, we source the concession financing as well as concession investors. We are partnering with the best in class globally to make sure that whatever we invest brings good things to life, so to speak. We haven't looked into ASEAN yet, other than Indonesia, because the need in Indonesia is still a lot, and at the same time we're just new. But I want to put a note that you cannot paint with one brush about ASEAN. You know, on 82,000 income per capita of Singapore is 88 times what Myanmar is at 1,000, or 17 times what Indonesia is making an income per capita. The need in Singapore is different than the need in Malaysia or Thailand or Indonesia. In Indonesia, we still talk a lot about the basic infrastructure need, the transition from coal into renewable energy. So you got to take into different type of considerations. One thing I can tell you though, most of us drive cars. EV is probably going to be one industry that we can actually cut across all ASEAN. Thailand, for example, is big in automotive. Indonesia is blessed again with a lot of rare earth and natural resources, from nickel to cobalt to bauxite and stuff like that. 770 million market in ASEAN is a great market for electric vehicle. So that's something that I think I'm looking forward to work with the neighboring ASEAN countries to develop the EV, which will help hopefully everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Paddy. I can't agree more with you actually that ASEAN consists of very different countries and so on. And I'm sure actually just the so-called just energy transition means that it's horses for courses. Is every country actually would have a different sort of states of energy mix, composition, as well as the boundary differences, if you will. By the way, just one follow-up quick question. You talked about balancing between impact, while at the same time returns. How do you do that?
For us, it's an and, not an or. For one thing, if somebody says, could you build the road to nowhere? Or, meaning, build something for the developmental aspect, but the return is not there, we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
But if there is a project that has a 50% IRR and has no development impact, we will not do that again. If you look at every single deals we have done, and we have done over $3.2 billion since we established, every single deal we did have those two components. It has an impact to the development. It also satisfies the economic return criteria.
Thank you, Parida. I think that's very insightful. Let us now turn to the banks, the commercial banks. Actually, we got Justin. Can I turn to you? Now, a lot of similar follow-up questions actually to what Parida has said, but perhaps actually, more importantly, slightly introducing a different aspect here. Measuring the impact we talked about and success of green financing could be quite complex. Now, what are the key performance indicators or the KPIs that HSBC utilizes to assess the effectiveness of your green financing initiatives, both in terms of environmental impact and the financial returns? Again, so this is the second part of it, actually, where how do you balance between returns and impact?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think, I think I'll probably echo many of the comments that my fellow panelists have mentioned already, but essentially when we set out our ambition to sort of become a net zero bank, but also to lead and finance the net zero transition in the world, and back in October 2020, we were one of the first international banks to do that, and I think it's especially significant not because that we have a footprint around the world, but we have a very large footprint, particularly in this part of the world, in Asia, and based on our heritage, but also our growth and our opportunity, a lot of it is in this part of the world. And I think it's important to understand that point and for us to actually reflect on what that means, right? I think this is something that has come out, I think, throughout the day at this Indo-Pacific Forum, and I think throughout this week. But ASEAN is about growth. It's about opportunity. It needs to grow, but it also needs to grow sustainably. And that's not only important because of mitigating climate change, of course, but also is to position itself to be successful in a future net zero economy, right? So obviously, if today the economy is exporting primarily fossil fuels, as a big part of what it's doing, but in the future, if most of your customers become net zero or seek to achieve those goals, then it's probably better to reposition your economy towards the products and goods that are necessary to enable that to happen. I think that's a point that has been sort of explained and sort of said probably throughout the day. But I think it's really, the reason I repeat that is because I think it kind of reflects back to us as a commercial bank. What kind of role do we want to play in enabling this to happen? Because this is an economy-wide transition. Banks don't control the economy, but we have an important role to play in this, right? So what that means is actually, I think it's come through in sort of three different ways for us, if you will. First is, obviously, probably the more obvious one is sustainable finance, right? Which is, I think, the main topic of this panel. So how do we ensure that the labeled products that are produced out there actually, we create a market for it, we create a demand for it, we make sure that it has the right sort of KPIs and everything around it. It's very important in this part of the world because many of our customers are perhaps new to this idea of sustainable finance, whether it's the linked products, some of loans or bonds, et cetera, any manner of products. So I think not just us, but I think all the Standard Chartered, or I think other banks in this area as well.
Thank you for mentioning us. No, I'm just joking.
I thought I'd throw it in there for you. But we have a role, in some ways to indicate this to our customers, right? To say, okay, well, this is what it is. This is how you can participate into it. And this is why you should do it, right? And why it's important. The second piece, of course, is I think around, it goes beyond this. And what that is sort of, I think, understanding the technologies and the opportunities that are needed for decarbonization. So often, I think the labeled world covers, sustainable finance. There's numbers around that. It only covers a portion of actually what companies are really doing. I think a lot of financing, a lot of activities, investment takes place without actually calling it specifically or labeling it green, for instance. And I think we need to understand what those technologies are, right? Investments in renewable energy, electric vehicles, copper for grids, which are a critical enabling technology, those sort of things. We need to find the appetite for them. And we need to make sure that we actually support these companies to be successful in the future. So this is another area, I think it's sort of the broader economy area. And the third and the other part, I think that we'll touch upon this on this panel is around partnerships, right? So as I said, as much as we like to say that we have an important role to play, we're only one piece of the puzzle or one piece of the solution towards help enabling a net zero economy. So that means that we need to form partnerships with multilaterals, with investors, with other banks, through various platforms. We've looked at a number of blended finance platforms, whether, Pentagreen is one that we've launched in partnership with Temasek in Singapore, as well as the Asia Development Bank. We looked at we're a participant in the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, which again is a blended finance partnership, which sort of seeks to help accelerate and enable a just transition. And I think, I say the just part by meaning that actually, it is meant to also help in an economy prepare itself in a net zero world. So I think these partnerships are also very, very important. And I know the question was about KPIs, but really I think if you add all these things together, and if we are making progress on them, then we can say, okay, we are making progress, right? This is one way to measure, how to go forward.
I can't agree more with you on the collaboration point. And of course, we'll talk more about the Just Energy Transition Partnership, because that's probably one of the most sort of complex, but again, actually is the umbrella for that blended finance for us. But before that, let's move on. We keep talking about that environmental impact. We should talk about sustainability. It's wider than that, on the social part of things as well. Kunadawan, as representing the only indigenous ASEAN bank, that Bangkok Bank actually, you're expanding rapidly across the region as well. And of course, you're one of the largest banks in Thailand. Can you share with us, in terms of role that Bangkok Bank has played in helping the micro and SME segments? Typically, in any country, they face barriers in accessing capital. How do you tailor your financial solutions and mechanisms to support the growth and address the unique challenges actually faced by this particular segment? And if you have any examples, that would be fantastic.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Sorry. Yes, thank you very much for having Bangkok Bank at this panel. So as a regional operator, Bangkok Bank operate in 14 economies, and 12 of which is Asia/ASEAN. And a very famous question is that how do SME face the challenge, and how do banks, typically helping them to access capital? First of all, Thailand, which is our home-based country, we have no issues about liquidity. We have massive liquidity, and most of which large local corporate have strong access to liquidity, whether it's loan or bonds. So it's over bank, basically, right? However, when it comes to smaller or retail or even SME lending, it's more of an issue on the credit rather than accessing for the sake of accessing. So I think database has become one of the important element which will assist any lenders going forward to being able to making a more speedy decision making and be more comfortable in lending to those SME. Now, as a bank, other than being just a lender, we also acted as we can be a guarantor. We can also act as an underwriter. We can also act as actually providing education to the SME, which if you look at carefully, these SME, they also need to transform themselves and catching the wave that is coming in the near future, that everyone have to be compliant to ESG. And therefore, educating them, helping them to transform, whether it's directly, helping them directly or indirectly by, say, helping the large corporate. And then the large corporate then be able to extend more help and support to them is another fold. And also accessing to technology is another challenge. So in terms of tailoring the product which we have, for instance, in Thailand, we have green loans, which we develop a product program which will help these SME to able to accessing the cheap funding, say, 2%
This
loan.
is sustainable loans
Yeah.
for SMEs.
Yes, for SME, particularly focusing on the smaller SME, not for large corporate. But okay, we do not prejudice against large corporate, but large corporate normally have their own internal cash flow enough to sort of like upgrade to the renewable energy. But for SME, if they wish to upgrade, say, some project renewable related to green or to save energy, to actually transform into a new technology, we do have that special loan, which is a very attractive low rate, and the process would be very speedy. However, having said that, even though we do have, but if you look at the amount, the growth rate from 21 to 22 grow by 600% or 6 times, but the base is very, very tiny.
Sure.
Very, very small. Vis-a-vis the loan itself, the bank has been granting renewable loan maybe like 4 or 5 billion, which is not specified, not call it, not name it, just like what you said. We haven't named it, but we've been lending to this project as well. So this type of product, we originated and we developed product program. Aside from that, we also work with the Thai Guarantee Credit Corporation to also develop another product program for these SME to be able to access to liquidity or rehabilitation on their business post-COVID. And on another side, from the capital market, we also indirectly, for instance, help the underwrite the Ministry of Finance, which is the sustainable bond. And the use of proceeds was to help the rehabilitation of these SMEs or smaller, less fortunate companies or families to access to this funding.
Thank you, Kunadawan. Can I just have a follow-up question? Interesting program that you have with Bangkok Bank, because it's actually a loan for SMEs. Low interest rates, you mentioned. How do you do the risking? Since our session talks about innovative financing, maybe this is something you can share with the audience, with every one of us as well, actually. How do you keep the rates low? How do you do the risking mechanism for that? I understand you may be working with other institutions like the Thai, development guarantee sort of companies, but how exactly are you doing that?
It's actually partly governmental support, but please understand that the denominator is very small, right? I mean, the size is like maybe limited to 2 million baht, in terms of the maximum and minimum.
True, but one I would think that the risk is also high.
We're not talking about huge, large size and all that. And that's why I said the opportunity to work again, maybe as a structurer to continue to develop this type of example would then encourage everyone in the country and the region to follow this type of financing, but again, with the support of the regulator.
Thank you, Kunadawan. Now, let's move on to this. We talked about, the types of blended finance, those types of things actually that are already happening in ASEAN. Can I go back to Pak Jiro? So, how do we ensure that ASEAN and generally the Pacific region attract the needed investment in energy transition? And what types of financing should the region be looking to attract? And can I attach JETP here? Because it's one of the great examples of that endeavor to come up actually with umbrella blended financing covering, almost everybody, philanthropy, the concessional loan providers and the commercial bank sector. But what do you think about this? How do you see the importance and the progress?
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very, I think, important question. And that's sort of the policy and then practical sort of challenges that many of us are actually trying to. Of course, there are different things and many things have to happen probably at the same time. policy and regulatory framework is also going to be important. One of the very interesting attempts that Indonesia is also leading is on the taxonomy issue, the transition finance taxonomy that would hopefully and then incentivize more sort of private sector financing to come in for the transition part of it, not the clear green sort of renewable energy part, but something that innovative one. For example, what we're trying to do in energy transition mechanism is about the early retirement or repurposing of coal-fired power plants. That investment in this coal-fired power plant with traditional sort of taxonomy, it could be considered as financing for the coal and fossil fuel, which for some banks it is not something that they would be enticed to do, right? So by changing the taxonomy, if they would allow that to be part of considered as sort of a green project, then we would be able to bring in more financing into that part of thing. The other things also, I mean, for us is important is that I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's about the demonstration part of it. And then that's exactly what we are trying to do with the transaction that we are pursuing right now for early coal retirement in the power plant called Cirebon in West Java, 660 megawatt coal-fired power plant. I think the challenge is that it is, because it is innovative, in a sense it is new. So and then, I mean, all the challenges that we need to go through to start something new is there. I mean, it's about the financial, it is about the environment and social due diligence, it is about regulatory sort of issues and government processes, etc. But I think in a way that organization like us, the Asian Development Bank, is really sort of well situated to do that kind of initial pilot project so that we can show that this kind of structure could work, and then also give some lessons that can be replicated later. Of course, this whatever the structure that's going to come up through this effort is not going to be the sort of the rules that everybody should follow, because the transaction by transaction, they all have the unique sort of the features of it, so that the structuring will be different by transaction. But anyway, at least it could hopefully show that this kind of using the blended finance, try to reduce the sort of the operating period of coal-fired power plants, so the reduced period, the greenhouse gas emission will be reduced using the blended finance, and and that could be possible if we can show that and demonstrate that. I think that would be sort of de-risking sort of the impact it might have for others to come in.
I must say it's highly commendable what the ADB has embarked upon on this early retirement of coal-fired power plants, because we know across emerging markets, particularly in Indonesia, that is so critical and probably one of the most difficult tasks to undertake. I can tell you, actually, it's definitely a lot easier than financing a renewable energy project. But that is so critical in order to help any country, emerging markets, which is dependent on coal-fired power plant, to accelerate the net zero. So that's really great. And I know ADB is working very closely with INA on that early retirement of the Cirebon example that you mentioned. So I wanted to invite Pak Rida. Do you want to share a few perspectives actually on that? I mean, that's a pioneering work. It's work in progress, we know, but it's probably going to be, as and when actually you solve that one, actually that's going to be one of the crown jewel of innovative financing ever, at least actually for now.
Yeah, thank you. For those of you here in the audience, there are about maybe up close to 80 gigawatt of energy installed power in Indonesia. About over 67% are actually coal powered. Partly because coal is the cheapest source of energy. Now, to retire coal, it's not easy because the renewable energy cost is not that cheap.
Yeah.
So what we have done with ADB is to try to find the coal-powered IPP owners that are willing to sell their IPP to us and our consortium, funded by ADB. And because we have a superior cost of capital, we have some profits or arbitrage, and that profit is being used to shorten the life of that IPP. And in so doing, it'll make the coal power plant retire early so that we can replace them with renewable energy.
Right.
That, in a nutshell, is what we're trying to do with ADB. We have been working with the sponsor and our co-investors. We are hoping to sign the CSPA subject to the acceptance of PLN, which is the state-owned electric company, in terms of the PPA, hopefully before the end of this year. Now imagine if that happens, that sort of blended financing type could become the blueprint of retiring coals, economically speaking, without asking for government support or discount from any type of owners. But it's not easy. It's very, very hard. And it's something that we're working extremely hard together to do.
Yeah. And I think all eyes are on Indonesia, and specifically that ENI and ADB partnership in paving the way for that pilot, and we wish you all the very best. But can I turn to Alice? I think the very reason you're here in Jakarta this time around is for this conference, as well as actually for the continuation of the JETP. So where are we now? How do you see that actually for Indonesia and Vietnam?
Thanks very much, Donny. So I think the JETPs are starting to have the desired effect, which is by bringing together government with high ambition to transition, alongside donors, alongside MDBs, DFIs, and private finance. You can take a systems-based approach to energy transition and think hard about where to direct the public capital, where to get the private capital in. And then that supports some of these new structures we're talking about. So as mentioned already by some on the panel, it's of course easier for everyone to sort of gravitate to the renewables end of the spectrum and finance those, but we can't get to net zero in Indonesia or Vietnam or wherever that way. So we have to take more of a systems-based approach, and I think the benefits of the JETP have been that we work to improve the kind of investment appetite and the project pipeline, and it takes time, of course, we're not there yet, but we're moving in the right direction to build up the sort of renewables project pipeline and ideally get those commercially financed. But then we direct the public money in a very smart way to where we need it to bring the cost of capital down. One example was mentioned there of managed phase out, which of course is going to need public capital to make the economics add up. But we can also bring in private finance, and that's the shared intention, I think, to help stretch the public finance further. And that's pretty new as well for private finance. So, we're all doing something new in this space to try and help solve for early phase out. And also grid. So we know that in Indonesia, we'll really need to invest in grid, particularly in regions, and the cost of that is going to be kind of compressed over a relatively short time frame. So I think we're also going to need to look at some new kind of financing structures there that help bring, again, public and private finance together and try and scale those projects. All of this, both the phase out and the grid investment, will make more space for renewables, which is obviously important for getting emissions down.
Thanks, Alice. We've got a few minutes left, but Justin, any further, as a bank actually that is an active part of GFANS, across all of this, whether it's JETP, whether it's other sort of innovative financing, if you will. I mean, you have any further comments to add on that?
I mean, absolutely, right? I think just to echo, I think maybe sometimes innovation is a term for difficult or challenging, right? I think the first one is always difficult, and of course, I can say from private finance perspective, we're very interested more than interested actually to participate in both of these platforms, such as JetPeas, and sort of, as you say, Alice, how do we leverage public finance to actually unlock more private finance, right? How do we sort of show the way that such a transaction such as a coal phase-out, a managed coal phase-out, I should say, can happen, and it can happen economically viable. And I think the reason of picking Indonesia is not to sort of just pick on Indonesia, but I think it's a very, it has a number of interesting factors that come together. One of which actually is that renewable energy is probably more challenging to build in Indonesia for a variety of reasons than in other parts of the world, where actually costs have come down and it's sort of not considered a risky type of investment. But here it is still a bit more challenging. So if we can find a way to sort of pave the way for a managed coal phase out and also to scale up renewable energy and also enabling technologies such as grid, if we can do it here in Indonesia, then I think this model, one is that we can unlock more here, and then we can sort of see how we can apply this model in other parts of the world, particularly other emerging markets as well. So yeah, I think it's just a wholeheartedly yes, that we have appetite to do a lot more of this, and I think I think this panel is an embodiment of the partnership that's needed to get this done.
Exactly right. And I know we're out of time, but last question, Kun Nadawan. How would you advise businesses who are here in the audience in order to attract more capital that is needed for them? I mean, any tips, tricks? I mean, as Bangkok Bank, actually, you deal with MSMEs, of course, the large corporates. So any quick one, actually. Tips for the companies here to ensure that they can attract the right capital while making positive impact to the environment.
Yes, thank you for the last question. I think the key success to what we've seen in the Thai, for instance, the Thai capital market has been developed very positively in terms of the ESG financing in the past, only over the past few years, and whereby you see that the local banks, not only the Bangkok Bank, but generally local bank has become the successful intermediary bridging between the investors and those who are the borrower. And we played a significant role in educating issuer as well as investors, all the way from institutional investors all the way down to retail investors, because the most recent sustainable bond that has been issuing in Thailand, although the size is like quite small for last year, has been about, I would say about $5 billion equivalent, half of which was issued by the Ministry of Finance, which I mentioned to fund the post-COVID rehabilitation. Another half was only issued by 5 companies, but all of those 5 companies varied from transportation, petchem, agriculture, auto, EV, you name it, right? So the successful story is that we can link between institutional investors / retail investor all the way up to the borrower. And therefore, this has been quite a success story in Thailand, and I think this may be a more meaningful and useful for other countries in ASEAN to follow the footsteps in developing this model.
Thank you. Good, Nadawan. And with that, actually, we have to wrap up. Thank you to all the distinguished panelists and speakers actually here, and to all of you for attending this. And we hope you got the insights, and thank you. We'll talk again. Thank you.
Once again, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, can we have a round of applause, please, for Mr. Rino Donasaputro as the President of the British Chamber of Commerce of Indonesia, moderating for the 3rd panel discussion on the second half of the day right here on the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum. And the discussion was on accelerating the mobilization of the business sector through sustainable and innovative financing. And also thank you to our distinguished speakers. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we have one more agenda before we conclude the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum. And just as a wrap-up and also as to refresh ourselves, the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum implementation of the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific is a flagship event organized by Indonesia as a part of its ASEAN chairmanship in 2023. The ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum aims to unlock further opportunities and build stronger connectivity between ASEAN countries and the Indo-Pacific. It will serve as an inclusive platform for ASEAN member states and partners, mainly from the public and private sectors, to engage in constructive discussion, identify potential tangible projects, and promote collaboration in the Indo-Pacific. We'd like to also mention the forum had invited 88 speakers and gathered around 2,500 participants from 51 countries. And we hope the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum that had commenced for the past 2 days in Jakarta, Indonesia, will elaborative discussions bring forth impact and engage new prospect, both for the public and private sector, and fostering solutions and action for the greater good of the people and the environment of this region. Once again, to our excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we still have one more agenda before we conclude the forum. And once again, we thank you very much to all our excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, for your presence, for your time and attendance, and for all your support for the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum for the past 2 days. And again, we kindly invite excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, to please take your seat, as momentarily we will have the closing statement which conclude the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum in Jakarta, Indonesia in the year 2023. And excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, in a matter of minutes, will be among us the Coordinating Minister for the Maritime and Investment Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia that will deliver the closing statement to conclude the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum in Jakarta, Indonesia in the year 2023. We'd like to once again thank you to all excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, for your participation. And we hope of all the panel discussion that was bring forth, all the discussions that we have heard for the past 2 days will give an impact and also action both from the people, from the public sector and private sectors, and bringing solutions and giving an impact back to the community. And the only way that we can have this impactful action is we're doing it together, because we're together and we'll be stronger when we are together. Once again, we'd like to extend our sincere thank you to our sponsors for their invaluable support. Bank Rakyat Indonesia, Pertamina, PT PLN Persero, Bank Negara Indonesia, Bank Mandiri, Mind ID, Telkom Indonesia, InJourney, Area, British Chamber of Commerce Indonesia, Google, Indonesian Business Council, PT Sun Cable Indonesia, Standard Chartered, ASEAN Food and Beverages Alliance, ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, Canada ASEAN Business Council, European Union Delegation to ASEAN, Google Arts and Culture, Lembaga Penjamin Simpanan, and also ROK Mission, US ASEAN Business Council, World Intellectual Property Organization, ADB, Amazon, Bloomberg Nerve, Booking.com, Coca, Netflix, Thales, and Zoom, Batik Chic. Thank you for your kind support for ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum implementation of the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. Once again, thank you to all sponsors for their unwavering support. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, once again, we kindly ask for your patience and understanding as we are now waiting for the last agenda that will conclude the Forum of ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, Coordinating Minister for Maritime and Investment Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, His Excellency Luhut Binsar Panjaitan has arrived.